Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a special request. 10 recordings featuring the best brass playing ever. These are symphonic recordings, not brass ensemble recordings. Brass with other things. And that's the point here, because the best brass playing involves not just fabulous brass playing individually, but also the ability to mix and blend and find their natural balance or unnatural balance within the larger ensemble, and also to differentiate timbres within the brass section and yet blend and make a big brassy sound. And of course, it's going to involve composers who wrote for the orchestra in such a way as to highlight the special power and sonority of your knockout, fabulous modern brass sections. Because great brass playing is very much a 20th century and even probably later 20th century invention. The caliber of performer these days is so high. It's just really kind of remarkable and amazing. And so I have chosen 10 recordings which highlight this particular part of the orchestra, which are unquestionably amazing if you're a brass player, which have a lot of distinctive brass sounds. Now, brass players are notoriously picky. They're very jealous of their provenance, of their prerogatives, of their lineage, of their type of sound production, of their embouchures, the way their lips go on the instruments. And so there are a lot of very strong opinions about what constitutes good brass playing and bad brass playing, but I don't care about any of that, because I'm only interested in recordings that sound amazing when you listen to the brass portions of them, and that are amazing for the rest of the performance as well. Because let's face it, if you're listening to anything other than a brass ensemble blasting brassily, you're not really, it matters that you have a great performance of the work in question. If the performance isn't great and the brass playing isn't great, with the rest of it being equally great, then the whole thing is just going to be horrible, isn't it? Who wants to hear a great brass section and then a terrible everything else? So this is greatness in general, with an emphasis on the brass. So you ready? 10 recordings, and here we go. Bruckner Symphony No. 4 with the Chicago Symphony and Daniel Barenboim. Bruckner is always a brass fiesta. We know that. That's why brass players love to play it and string players hate to play it, because all they do is play tremolos if you're a string player. But if you're a brass player, oh my goodness, do you have a good time, because it's not very quick, and it's written for the entire section to sound glorious. And my God, in this Bruckner 5, does the Chicago Symphony brass sound glorious and wild and exciting, and oh my God, it's unbelievable. That was sort of, if you play the scherzo of this recording, it's hard to listen to anybody else's afterwards. It really is, because it's just beyond thrilling. And you actually hear things like the horn triplets, one of the problems, as I've said, just a few moments ago, with a lot of brass playing is that it's too compacted and blended. This is like Karajan in Berlin. I never liked their brass playing. When the horns were going crazy, okay, yeah, sure. But everybody else, if you listen to Karajan's Bruckner, you miss so much detail, because it all just clots. You don't have trumpets, trombones, horns, tuba down there somewhere as individual strands of color, which can all come together to make a magnificent sound, of course, but you want to be able to hear what they're doing. And here you do. In this performance, you really do. It's amazing. Next, Varèse, Ameriques, which is, of course, an orchestral extravaganza for everybody, including percussion, with the Cleveland Orchestra and Christoph Dohnányi. There is a passage in Ameriques where 6 trumpets are playing in unison this crazy melodic like that sort of thing. It's unbelievable. And I remember seeing this performance, this piece live with them with my friends from Finland. I remember I mentioned this before, and that passage came along, and these 6 trumpets were just blasting this thing out in an absolutely perfect unison. It was unreal. It sounded like a single instrument, and they just looked at me and said, "Wow!" And then the recording came out, and the recording was every bit as good. I mean, it had all of those qualities. It is an astonishing ensemble achievement. And I remember when it was over, when the live performance was over, Dohnányi couldn't even believe what they'd done. He just sort of turned around to the audience and went, "Whoa!" That was something, wasn't it? And it was. It was one of those incredible moments, and it was captured very successfully on disc by Decca. So yeah, you want to hear, I mean, the amazing precision and ensemble elegance, which is Cleveland. Yeah. Ameriques by Varèse under Dohnányi. It's incredible on Decca. Next, Strauss, the Sinfonia Domestica of all things, with the Scottish National Orchestra and Nimi Järvi. Now, I understand in order to get to the fabulous brass part, you're going to have to listen to the Sinfonia Domestica, which may be too much for some people. But the last 10 minutes, the funny fugue where the family is all arguing and going crazy, and the horns are going da 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 da. The Scottish National Orchestra has an amazing brass section. They always did. They have fantastic horns. Those English horns, the English horn playing tradition was sort of inaugurated by Dennis Brain or his dad or whoever, one of the Brains, is legendary. And in this particular case, what usually puts me off from, the London orchestras is that the horns are fabulous, but the trombones are, trumpets are usually very good. But they don't have that equality that creates what I consider to be the most powerful and amazing brass sound. But Scottish National has it. They've got a killer bass trombone, or they did. Wonderful sounding trombones, and nice low brass, and brilliant trumpets, and amazing horns. And when Järvi lets them just rip into that closing section of the Sinfonia Domestica, whew, boy, is that fireworks. It's just terrific. And Chandos recorded them just amazingly. So, yeah. I mean, all of that Strauss is just terrific from a brass point of view. It really is. But we're going to get to more Strauss later, so don't worry. But that is a fiesta, a feast of brass playing. Next, Janáček Sinfonietta, of course. I mean, 16 trumpets, and you've got like 9 regular trumpets and 3 other trumpets, and then a bass trumpet and 2 tenor tubas and a regular tuba and 3 trombones making all kinds of strange, gnarly sounds. And strangely enough, speaking of strange sounds, the recording that I just think is the best ever for this is Raphael Kubelik with the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra. Bavarian Radio has one hell of a brass section. It really does. I grew up with them being dogged as a mere radio orchestra, and not a patch on like the great German orchestras, the Berlin Phil and the Staatskapelle Dresden and whatnot. Well, for much of their history, that was probably true in the 50s and 60s and whatnot. But by the time Kubelik got them, they had some pretty remarkable players. And aside from that, they had German radio engineers who knew how to record them well. And that really made a huge difference in a piece like the Janáček Sinfonietta, where you've just got crap loads of brass, and you've got to capture, it's the acoustic, it's the sound of the massed brass in that recording that is so beautiful. It's also as good in the Taurus bulba that's usually accompanies, it's coupled with. Really a striking and wonderful sound with everybody having some sort of tangy kind of personality, and just that wall of trumpets coming at you in Sinfonietta is something very, very special. And of course, the music was very close to Kubelik, very close to his heart, and he did it in a way which I think is just uniquely compelling. I really do, because he doesn't mess with it. He lets Janáček be Janáček, warts and all. The sudden endings are sudden, and then the strange collisions of weird sounds and timbres, they all just happen. And it's thrilling, absolutely thrilling. Number 5, Now, we've got a couple Mahlers, because you got to have Mahler if you're going to have amazing brass playing. His first symphony with the Pittsburgh Symphony and Manfred Honeck on Exton. Yes, the Japanese label. Pittsburgh has the most glorious horn section in the universe. I've said it many times. I mean, they make Vienna sound like amateurs. No, they don't, but they have this amazing horn section, and everyone else is of the same caliber. I mean, it's a glorious brass sound, and in this Mahler one particularly, oh my goodness, it is so beautiful. It's luminous. They have just this effortless way of cutting through the texture and sounding bold and brilliant and gutsy without forcing, without forcing the tone. It's really an extraordinary sound, and it's thrilling in this particular Mahler one. And speaking of Mahler, the Mahler 5, this is a sleeper, trust me. Mahler 5 with New York Phil and Zubin Mehta on Warner, which was Teldec when it originally came out. Now, Mehta's New York Phil recordings, get trashed roundly, and some of them were truly terrible. Everybody was just sleeping. They were sleepwalking through the music. They really were. But New York Phil is a great orchestra when it wants to be. It has always had an extraordinary brass section, especially the trumpets and the trombones. The horns were a sometime thing, but they've gotten better. And this Mahler 5, Mahler 5 is a big brass section, 6 horns, 6 trumpets, trombones and tuba. It's a big brass section. And it's a brassy symphony. It's the symphony that most conductors get wrong. It's the hardest of all of them to pull off successfully. And it says something about Zubin Mehta that he's recorded it a few times, and he's always done it well. I mean, his LA performance was very good, but this New York one has the New York Philharmonic brass section in its absolute peak. Was it Phil Smith with trumpet and Joe Alessi on trombone, and these legendary names in the world of brass playing, and they were just on the top of their game for this whole performance. There's a passage for the trombones in the second movement when they're going da 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 dum da 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 dum. It's usually just smeared in most performances. You hear ya da 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 like that, but not here. Everything is just crystal clear and brilliant, and the chorale at the end is stunning. And my God, they play well. It really is a joy, just a joy to hear the parts really played with expression and force and subtlety where there needs to be subtlety, which of course there is. There's that wonderful horn solo with the scherzo, and yeah, I mean it's really an amazing performance, especially from the point of view of the brass section. Then we have to do, of course, Stravinsky, the Rite of Spring, where you've got a crazy, huge brass section that goes completely bonkers in the finale. And there are many great recordings of the Rite of Spring, with many great orchestras that have unbelievable brass playing. Everybody from the London Symphony to the Chicago Symphony to New York to the Czech Phil. I mean, all kinds of people doing amazing things in the Rite of Spring. But my choice, if you want to hear unbelievable and characterful brass playing in the Rite of Spring, is Ottmar Suitner with the Staatskapelle Dresden, because there is something to be said for an orchestra. I mean, the Staatskapelle Dresden is a great orchestra, and one that has, I mean, their specialty was Richard Strauss. I mean, it's virtuosic romantic stuff, in addition to the usual German stuff where everybody has to behave. But to hear it sometimes in orchestra out of its element. Nobody goes to the Staatskapelle Dresden to listen to Stravinsky, and certainly not the Rite of Spring, where they are, it's rhythmically very, very intricate, which is not usually a German thing. And you've got, the decompacted timbres that Stravinsky uses, highlighting various sections with extremely virtuosic licks. And boy, are they up for it. And Suitner is too. I mean, it's a somewhat measured performance, but you hear everything. You hear absolutely everything. And it's transparent and just insanely powerful. I mean, you could just hear these guys saying, wait a minute, we're not going to let this guy get the best of us. We are going to simply cut loose and let it rip and have a great time doing something that they don't think we can do. And so we're going to show those suckers that we could blast through this thing as well as anybody, if not better. And they do. It's an unbelievable performance, and the brass playing is jaw-droppingly fine. So that's that one. Now you have another Bruckner. Yeah, I mean, you got to do the Vienna Philharmonic somewhere, don't you? Well, I mean, because they have a very distinctive brass sound, with the horns kind of dominating everything as often as not. But one of the most glorious recordings of the Vienna Philharmonic brass section has to be Giulini's Bruckner Ninth, which is as slow and grand a Bruckner Ninth as you're ever going to hear in your life, with climaxes that absolutely rip the heavens apart. I mean, the cosmic void sound, in the adagio, da 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 da, when the horn's going what the wah, the trumpet's going da 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 da. It'll make you sweat. It really will. It's just an exceptional performance, first of all. I mean, it's just the most spiritually luminous, heartfelt, agonizing, exalted, just incredible. And a lot of it is because of that amazing, absolutely amazing Vienna brass playing, where Giulini lets them do their thing. Richard Strauss always said, never look encouragingly at the brass. That was one of his rules for conductors. Well, you may not have to look encouragingly at the brass, but you should also not look discouragingly at the brass. There are moments when you have to let them just do it and not get in the way as a conductor, not fuss, because especially today, these people are so gifted and so talented, and they instinctively know how to play as a corporate body. And so you got to let them do it. And, most conductors these days, I mean, they suck. I mean, let's face it. And when it comes to these things, they just get in the way. They're anti-musical. The orchestras know the music better than they do and can play it better than they do. And they know what sounds they need to make. And, so many conductors these days are so busy manipulating or doing things that they think are interesting or deep or whatever they think. And all they're doing is preventing the natural musicianship of the players from manifesting the way it should. And Giulini was a guy who trusted his players and could, really let them be their best selves in his best recordings, of course. His not best recordings were snooze fests. But this Bruckner Ninth, wow. And if you want to hear Vienna doing Vienna, this is definitely one of the great exemplars. Next, well, I talked about how Karajan and Berlin kind of had this congealed brass sound that was so unpleasant. It comes out at its very worst in his Bruckner Fourth and Fifth, like the chorale at the end of the Bruckner Fifth, where the people are doing different things rhythmically, but you just hear this compacted mush of chorale sound. The trombones are going dun 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 dun. There's no rhythm. There's no blend. There's no independence of line. It just drives me nuts. Or in the Fourth, where in the scherzo, where you've got the horns doing their triplet things, da 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 da, and while they're doing that, the trombones are going yamp yamp ba 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 yamp yamp ba 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 yamp ba ba ba. The trumpets are going dum ba da ba da. All of those are separate lines, and here they're just like glue. But there were some moments when Karajan, for some reason, decided to just turn them loose. And when he did turn them loose, boy, could they make a sound. They could be incredibly powerful. One of those places actually is in his recording of the Sinfonia Domestica, believe it or not. But I would never inflict two Sinfoniae Domesticae on any self-respecting music listener. No. Finlandia on EMI. Karajan recorded it multiple times. He always did it well. But the EMI Finlandia, I think it's digital. I don't know whether it is or it isn't. But that Finlandia with Berlin, he did some late Sibelius recordings, the number 1, which was digital, and 6, where for some reason it sounded like a different orchestra, probably because it wasn't recorded in the Philharmonic, a hall that was not congenial to a lively and exciting sound. And Karajan was always messing with balances and things too, because he had his own recording equipment or mixing equipment, whatever. But those late Sibelius recordings, the First Symphony is another one, where it seems like they've just gone completely off their rockers. I mean, the sound is actually ragged at times. I don't mean ragged I mean raw. I don't mean ragged. That's like disorganized and not together, which they are. But raw and edgy. And it's such a different sound And the opening of Finlandia with the brass going, he just lets them roar. It's the nastiest, raspiest, scariest sound. Oh my God, it's wonderful. Those gorgeous chorales at the end. That is the sound I wish they could have made all the time. But, Karajan being Karajan, they didn't. It was an exception. But what an exception. That Finlandia is legendary among Finlandists for the Karajan and Berlin sound, where they've just decided, rather than doing the Karajan thing, which they do, of course, because, there's the strings doing the yummy string things at the beginning. Yeah, it's there. That density of string sound is there. But it's matched by a powerful, menacing, looming presence in the brass. For once, now, there were more times than that. Karajan often did some good things with his brass, but here, particularly, that is some Finlandia. My God. And it really shows the Berlin brass at their best, what they could do when they were given permission. And they did. And last but not least, another Richard Strauss we had to talk about, an Alpine symphony, which of course is a brass fiesta. It's got like 20 horns if you include the offstage ones, and just a ridiculously huge brass complement otherwise. And it's Schulte, again with Bavarian radio. An orchestra, like I said, they'll surprise you. They can surprise you. This Alpine Symphony is such a great recording. It's one of the true sleepers in the Schulte discography because, Schulte was kind of a butcher when it came to orchestral recordings. He was just sort of like, slice them and dice them as often as not. But here, it's a quick performance. It's a thrilling performance. It has the best storm you've ever heard. Well, one of the best, one of the two best. The extraordinary storm with the best thunder machine ever. That's true at the climax, but no, it's not the thunder machine that does it. It's the amazing sonority and amplitude of this ridiculously huge brass section throughout the work. Really exceptional playing. It seems like, I don't know, it seems like it's one of those occasions where they all just decided they were going to do their damnedest on behalf of a piece of music that's usually, kind of looked down upon because it is, cinematic. Let's put it that way. It's a day in the life of an Alp, and this day in the life of an Alp has like a dawn, and you climb the mountain, then you go down the mountain, and then you have night, which goes on for 10 minutes too long, like everything in Strauss. But boy, there you've got a brass section that's just absolutely decided that they're going to be world-beating, and they are phenomenal. And so there you have it. 10 recordings, 10 amazing recordings that highlight the unbelievable sound of the modern symphonic brass section. This as a section, not just a brass clump of brass things being brassy. No, this is artistic brass playing at its finest. So I hope you have some of these recordings. If you haven't, feel free. Listen to them and enjoy. And keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.